Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this week's webinar, Why January 1st is Too Late. 5 things employers must do now to prepare for the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. And this webinar is brought to you by FreedomCare Benefits. And the keynote speakers today are me, Kaya Bromley, founder and president of Your Obamacare Advisors, and Sean McGuire, founder and president of E.D. Bellis Healthcare Consultants. Hi, Sean.
Hello, how you doing? Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to this lively discussion today.
I think it will be lively. Everything's lively about the ACA right now, isn't it?
No doubt.
So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Kaya Bromley. I started Your Obamacare Advisors a couple of years ago because my clients, mostly fast food, were needing to figure out what was going on with the ACA. And I figured out that some of it was as complicated as they thought, but most of it was not. And I found a lot of ways that I was able to simplify the ACA for my clients and ended up writing a book called The Employer's Guide to Obamacare that is available on Amazon. And I have been a lawyer for 12 years, and I've been focusing primarily on the ACA for the last about 3.5 years. And with me today is Sean McGuire. Sean, can you talk a little bit about your background and how you got involved with the ACA?
Sure, yeah. I'm one of the few people that kind of had the opportunity to be working on Capitol Hill when they were putting together the concept of health reform. And what many people don't realize is that this is kind of a seminal piece of legislation in U.S. history, and that there's not many that are quite as large in the scope and magnitude as the ACA. And many smaller pieces of legislation ultimately made it in there, and I had the opportunity to work on many of those and have been following and working on the ACA for almost 6 years now. And about 3 years ago, I started a consulting company here in Omaha, Nebraska to really help the small businesses and smaller healthcare providers navigate all of these challenges that are coming down. And that was based upon reading this. And a few months ago, paths crossed with Kaya, and we're really looking forward to putting our brains together to really help you guys solve problems this next hour.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. Now, before we get started, I always have to give my warning because I am a lawyer. This is our warning that I give at the beginning of every one of my presentations. This is not a substitute for legal advice. Now, I am a lawyer, and Sean's done a lot of legal work also, even though he's not a lawyer, but this is not a substitute for legal advice. You do need to go and get your own legal advice about this. Also, it's not a reason to panic, although we do want you to panic a little bit because time's running out, and we're seeing that a lot of people are just waiting to see what's going to happen. So while panicking is really not constructive, we do want you to be worried and start doing something about it. And we're going to give you a lot of information today. It's not a reason to delay. The biggest message that if you could walk away with, you get the biggest value in this first couple minutes of this webinar, is that you have to start planning now. I've been saying it all along, but now I'm really not kidding. Time is really up, where if you want to implement a strategy that's going to save you a lot of money, you need to do it now. Because if you wait till November, December, you're just out of time, and there's no way that you're going to be able to do it. So you really cannot delay anymore. So that's our warning. But now we're going to get into the big picture, and I'm going to turn this part over to Sean because he's going to talk a little bit about the landscape, how we got here, and kind of set the stage for this discussion we're going to have about these 5 tips we're going to give you. Sean?
Sure. Well, thanks for that introduction. And as we kind of walk through the process here, we're going to try not to inundate you with so much information, and I'm sure, this is probably a subject that everybody's sick of hearing about. But if I could, just drive forward Kaya's point about not waiting much longer, because as I kind of look at this, as I work with the people that I work with, many people are kind of looking at the ACA as I kind of look at it as like your project of cleaning out a closet or a garage or something that you really don't want to do and you're avoiding. And unfortunately, many people are going to be in reactionary mode, and that's not good, because this has actually been a process that's been going on for so long. And by process, I mean an implementation of a major piece of legislation. So let's take a moment to talk for a few moments about why the ACA was passed, and kind of as you are in your own markets across the country about how some of these changes are really impacting not only your organization, but how your insurance is going to be offered moving forward, as well as your costs and certain changes in networks and so on and so forth. And so when you look at health policy from from a high level, you really kind of need to look at it from three pillars, and that is in the area of access. How do you access healthcare in this country? Cost. How do we make it the most affordable as opposed to other countries where we score much lower? And finally, how do we improve quality? Now, politically, when you looked at how the ACA was passed, dealing with the cost issue wasn't very attractive to many of the people in the policy arena, probably because they were more interested in preserving their political futures. So they focused on how do we get more people insured in this country, and that's exactly why they passed it, basically to deal with the access problem. And so what you see in it is, despite the fact that it's almost 900 pages in length, the stuff that actually affects employers is really only a small part of the law, and those are the things that dealt with the insurance market reforms. And so as a result of these insurance market reforms, you had a lot of legislative deal-making going on. The political will was there to get people, the 46 million uninsured people coverage. Legislatively, how do they go about doing that? Well, one thing that happened when Democrats took over Congress in 2006 is they follow a philosophy called pay-go, and that means that for every spending piece in the policy realm, it needs to be either offset with a cost cut or a revenue raiser, a la new taxes. And when you go back and look at the law getting passed, there was $1 trillion price point put on it, in that the president didn't want it to cost more than $1 trillion. And as they were putting the law together, a lot of the pain points that are now coming down the pike for employers were a direct result of that. How do they make this law budget neutral in order to get it through the legislative process? And you have certain things like, for example, employers over 50 having to offer health insurance now, which is essentially was delayed 1 year, but it's going to be coming up right around the corner. The issue essentially of this webinar, but it's going to be really difficult for it to go away. And that's just because of public policy and numbers, in that it was one of the largest revenue raisers in the law, were the taxes and penalties on those employers that did not offer insurance. And so while many people might say, let's hope that this thing goes away, from a policy-making standpoint, it's going to be really difficult, and therefore you need to be focusing on these things that we're going to be outlining here in the next few moments, and assessing your current situation and identifying the certain risks based upon the size of your organization, your industry, and where you are located in the country, because those are the main driving variables, as well as performing a cost-benefit analysis on your organization, and then developing systems and processes for reporting this, because the official employer report is coming in February of 2016. That's just going to be coming about 18 months down the road, and that's going to be something that's going to be awfully difficult. And it's really time to stop avoiding the issue and taking a holistic look at this, and then working on some of the legal areas around reporting and some of these strategies that you can do by taking advantage of and learning about the law. And I'm going to hand it back off to Kay to kind of go through some of those legal challenges in the big picture, and then I think we can kind of translate into our 5 steps of action.
Sean, that was a fantastic overview, because I'm saying it every day to my clients that this law is going to be funded by the penalties that employers pay, in large part. And so giving that background really is a great context for people to understand that we're not just blowing smoke. This really is a major part of the funding. So to think that it's going to go away again, it's really not realistic. And to go from there into the legal analysis, one of the other arguments that we hear a lot from our clients is it's going to be overturned, or it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and that's going to hold it up. Right now, there are lawsuits that are still pending, and there are conflicting lawsuits. So it's possible at some point it could go back up to the Supreme Court someday. But the reality is the Supreme Court already had their chance to overturn this. So to think that, to put all of your cards on the bet that the Supreme Court's going to overturn it after they already had the opportunity and did not do so that's not where I would put my bet. I think it's more likely that things might change, and if they change, that doesn't mean it's going to go away completely. So it's much easier to change your course a little bit if you know where you're going. But if you haven't even started down this road and you don't have any idea, then all of those changes are going to be new to you anyway. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I have a lot of clients who've been preparing for this for the last 2 years. When changes come down the road for them, it's very easy for them to adjust to those changes. It's very small adjustments in how they're calculating things like, how they're calculating their numbers, how they're tracking employees. Whatever the changes, it's very easy for them to adapt. For the new clients that are calling me every single day who have done nothing, it doesn't matter if it changes tomorrow, if there's more transition relief, everything is a challenge for them. So I'm not going to say there's not going to be legal challenges that aren't going to change it. There could be, who knows? But the reality is we need to deal with what we know right now, and what we know right now is that the law is in effect. Employers have to be compliant by January 1st, 2015, or they are going to face all of the employer penalties. And what Sean and I are doing in this webinar is we've broken down into 5 steps the 5 things that employers need to do to be compliant with the ACA, because we both agree that the number one most important thing that employers need to be focusing on is avoiding those penalties.
Yeah, it's never wise to be reactionary with the IRS.
Yeah, good point. And the reality is, we've got one more slide here before we get into those 5, is that there's no more excuses, because employers had so much time to comply, and because you had years of transition relief. Next year, if the IRS audits you and you say, well, I didn't have time, you don't have that excuse anymore. I use the example all the time that if you had, you're playing video games and you've got all these extra lives that you could keep going, you've used up all of your extra lives with the transition relief. So it's really time to, they say that the ignorance of the law is no excuse. It's not going to get you out of it if you don't know it. So you don't have any more excuses, unfortunately. And after November 15th, in our opinion, you're too late. No, the reason we use that date is because November 15th is when the exchanges open, and you're going to have a lot of your employees go to the exchanges and apply for coverage. And if you think that that's not going to happen, let me tell you why I think you're wrong. The federal government has a vested interest to recruit your employees to go apply to the exchanges, because they need as many young, healthy people in the exchanges as possible, because that's how they balance out the cost of the health care. If they only had the sick people that enrolled in the health care, then the cost is too expensive. So I know I went through that really quickly, but understand that there's a huge force that is trying to get your employees into the exchanges, and the subsidies and the tax credits are very, very generous. So if you think also that your employees won't do it because they won't want to spend any money, there are a lot of subsidies that are available where employees can get bronze plans for no cost out of their pocket at all. There are subsidies and tax credits available to people who make up to 400% of the poverty level. That's something like $92,000 for a family of 4. So the reason that we are concerned about that is because if you have employees that go to the exchange and then you offer insurance after November 15th, then you've got conflicting information with the exchanges. They're saying you didn't offer insurance. You're saying that you did. It's much cleaner for you if you offer your insurance before November 15th, and it's really clear that when you get audited in 2 years, because everyone's going to get audited, when you get audited in 2 years about whether or not you owe penalties, that you can establish, no, I offered the insurance before November 15th. These employees knew I offered it. Here's a piece of paper that they signed showing that they knew I offered it, and they went to the exchange and asked for the subsidy anyway. So that's the reason that we picked November 15th as the time that you should already have made your offer of insurance.
If I could only add to your point, I was working with a client of mine, and they were actually one of our first ones, really ones that were, doing their due diligence and really trying to comply with the law and make sure that everything was okay. And, they actually called me the day after the re-election campaign because they're like, well, this thing is certainly here to stay. And we've worked and spent an awful lot of time, going through the process. And even despite our efforts, they still had a couple of their employees that went through the exchange this first time around. So if that gives you an example of, like, it's going to happen, So therefore, if you're an employer, what can you do? And the answer is, document. And we'll get into
Yes.
more of those things, but essentially identifying these areas of concern and putting the appropriate processes in place before November 15th.
Exactly. Great point. So our number one step is knowing the basics. That sounds really broad, and it is to an extent. What do we mean by know the basics? Well, we're going to give you 2 slides of things that you should already know as an employer. First of all, you should already know if you're an applicable large employer. That means that if you have now the law says if you have over 50 full-time and full-time equivalent employees, the transition relief for 2015 is over 100. If you don't already know if you're an applicable large employer or not, you either need to go pick up my book, the Employer's Guide to Obamacare. It's available on Amazon. You need to call Sean. You need to call us. You need to call your attorney. You need to get online and figure this out, because this is a base level analysis that you have to have done, as well as the controls group analysis. That's where, if you are part of more than one entity, the IRS is going to aggregate your entity and other entities in which you're involved. And there are different percentages and different tests. It's not super complicated. I spell it out in my book. If you go online, it's a little bit complicated to try to understand it there, so it's easier to call and get help on that one if you have any questions about it. And it's very, very critical, because if you think that you're complying and you're only complying with your organization and you're part of a controls group and you don't comply with other organizations you control, or not even control, but you're part of a controlled group, you could still pay the penalty, the $2,000 per employee penalty, for every single full-time employee across every single entity, even the one that you are paying the insurance for. So this is not a small deal that we're talking about here. The next thing is how many full-time employees you have. Some people might think that's a really easy one. I was just working with a client last week who got that number wrong. And so they have a lot more full-time employees today than they thought they had last week. And as you can imagine, that completely changes their strategy on how they count their full-time employees. And how many people they have to offer insurance to. The other problem with this one is that if you are in California or one of the states that has mandatory sick leave pay, different leave rules, when you're counting whether someone's full time, it's the hours of service that they work for you. So the hours that you pay them for. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're in your facility and they're working. It's the hours that you're paying them for. So there's a lot of nuances here with how many full-time employees that you have. Sean, anything to add on that one before I go to the next one?
Well, I think this is just, I think, as I look at this issue, addressing these 3 questions and really understanding exactly how many full-time employees you have is absolutely paramount to your success navigating this, because if you don't have an idea of how many full-time employees are and where you stand as far as being an applicable large employer, you have no idea what your true risk is under the law.
Yep. And you'd be surprised, a lot of people that I talk to on a daily basis and brokers that I work with have told me about clients that they have that think that they understand their full-time employees, but when it comes to the ACA and what you're required to know for the ACA purposes, they do not know. And it's very scary when you calculate the penalties that could be assessed just for making this small mistake. It's pretty horrific.
We'll go in a little bit more into detail about the measuring look-back periods as well as we move forward.
Then these are the other 3. The other thing is how much it would cost to pay the penalties versus offer the insurance. You've probably heard this called the pay or play analysis. Believe it or not, there is a narrow window of employers that it makes more sense to pay the penalties, but it's a narrow fact pattern of when that makes sense, because most of the time it's more effective to offer the insurance. The insurance is tax deductible. Paying the penalties is not. Paying the penalties, you're actually paying far more than the penalties because you're paying it on after-tax income. It's an excise tax. So you're paying even more than you think you are, as opposed to offering insurance. all of the different strategies out there that offer tax benefits, doing captives. I know, it used to be where captives and self-insurance was something that only very, very large employers did, and now because of the ACA, companies like the sponsor of this webinar, FreedomCare, have put together captive programs that are available even if you only have 50 employees. So you have to really understand that analysis. It's not just a simple calculator that you find free on a website. It's a much more sophisticated analysis that you need to do so that you know that you're making the right decision for your company. And then I touched on this a little bit, what insurance options are available. You should already have looked into this. You should have looked into fully insured plans, and you should have looked into self-insured plans. And if you have not done that yet, you need to talk to your broker. And if your broker is only selling you one or the other, you need to go to a second broker, because you need to look at both. You need to look at all of the options. FreedomCare, for example, is doing a self-insured program. It is a fantastic program if you're the right type of employer. It offers tax benefits. It allows you to create your own captive. It allows you to do things that even are a benefit, even if the ACA wasn't around. It allows you to create a structure for estate planning purposes, tax planning purposes, that is a great thing whether the ACA is around or not. So you need to really understand all of these different options and not go with the first option that's given to you. And also, in Sean, I know that you deal with this as much as I do. We deal a lot with brokers. We do presentations with brokers. We advise brokers. Brokers give us a lot of our information about different products. The thing is, though, if you're getting all of your advice from one person who's trying to sell you one thing, that's a problem, because you need someone who is able to stand in your shoes and not be pressured to make every road you go down end at that person's product. So it's really important to make sure that you're getting your advice from the right place. Sean, thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, brokers have a lot of resources, to help handle a lot of the questions, but at the end of the day, you really kind of need an independent analysis from somebody looking at it from a whole economic perspective as opposed to just benefits, because this is much more of a bigger economic decision than people are really making it out to be from my standpoint. And I think relying on somebody that's basically getting their advice secondhand from a trade association or a carrier it might not be the best approach.
Yeah, and that's a really great point, because I'm seeing the same thing too. A lot of the brokers that I work with, who are fantastic, by the way, are getting their advice either from a trade association or an attorney that briefed a group, and then they get this trickle down of information. That's a lot different, and a lot of times there's misinformation, because it's like a telephone game. So by the time it gets to down to the last level, it's gotten lost in translation. So I've seen a lot of times where a well-meaning advisor was giving some advice that wasn't quite accurate, and so when the employer was making their decision based on that inaccurate advice, that was really tough. So we strongly recommend that you go to an independent, someone who's not selling you something, independent person to do your analysis.
CPA is a good resource as well,
Absolutely. CPAs, attorneys, definitely. And Edie Bellis and your Obamacare advisors both have those resources if we can help you out. Then finally, your plan for January 1st, 2015. That's kind of a no-brainer, and I hate to even have to write it here, because I hope that everyone already is at least close to having a plan for January 1st. The reason that we say that is because the penalties start being assessable on January 1st, 2015. And you have to give a reasonable amount of time when you offer insurance. You have to give a reasonable amount of time for your employee to enroll and to learn about it and to decide if they want to accept it or not. So you can't wait till December 31st to decide to offer a plan. And if you haven't offered the plan by January 1st, you could be looking at some serious trouble, and especially if you've got even a non-calendar year plan. If you don't understand these rules, and there's a series of tests that you have to satisfy in order to qualify as a non-calendar year plan and not be assessed penalties from January 1st until your enrollment period. But if you screw that up, you pay the penalties as of January 1st. So that's why I'm telling you, even if you have a non-calendar year plan, you need to make sure that you satisfy all of the tests now to make sure that you're going to be okay on January 1st and not not pay the penalties from January to June or whatever your non-calendar year plan is. So with that, Sean, do you have something else, or can I?
I was just going to add on that final point. As you look at the industry in general, and I'm talking the insurance industry, what's happening is a lot of brokers are essentially renewing all of their commercial clients in December. So, initially it had been scattered out throughout the year, but based upon the certain, and this is just the taxes in the ACA on health insurance companies, these other provisions, all of these things end up trickling down into premiums. And so what happened is these carriers encouraged businesses to renew at an earlier date, and what that is December of this year. And so, as you're looking for advice on this issue, be conscientious of the fact that they're going to be servicing a lot of their customers in 1 month when previously it had been done over 12 months.
The other thing that I would caution about that is a lot of my clients who renewed what they did last year decided that either the rates were raised or something changed in that policy and they did not want to continue it. And my clients, luckily, all started doing this 6 months ago, planning for this year. So anyone who's waiting till December and just waiting to see what gets plopped on their lap is going to have a problem, because across the board, I have not seen a single employer client of mine that went with the exact same thing they had last year. They had to make changes. So that's a big concern.
Definitely.
All right, step one. Actually, that was step one. This is step two. Make sure that you have a strategy that guarantees ACA compliance. Now, guarantees is a strong word, and so I want you to understand that we are saying that you can guarantee ACA compliance. It's not as hard as you think, but you have to make sure that your strategy is one that guarantees ACA compliance. And the reason that we make this a point out of our 5 tips is that some of the strategies out there have you rolling the dice and playing the odds. So, for example, offering something that satisfies one penalty and you just take the risk, take the flyer on the second penalty and just hope that no one goes to the exchange. This is a strategy, that one in particular I'm talking about. There's a large company with a website out there that is pushing that as a strategy, and I've worked with a very large restaurant client who is using that as a strategy. I don't think it's a good strategy for the reasons that I explained earlier, that the federal government is going to be recruiting people onto the exchanges. So that's what I mean by guaranteeing ACA compliance, not rolling the dice, wondering, well, I'm just going to see if I incur that other penalty. So Sean and I are going to talk now a little bit about guaranteed compliance. What does that mean? One of the biggest reasons that I would say that you don't have a choice is if you have not already been planning. If you are someone who you know that you're over 100 employees and you've done nothing yet, there are a lot of things that we figured out through working on this over the last 3 years. And it's a learning curve. It's not something that you just pick up right away. And if you've not already begun planning and you start thinking that you know all these cute little ways around this or that, you found this loophole or that loophole, let me tell you that over the last 3 years, we've thought of them all, and we figured out that you can't do them. So your only choice at this point, and you feel free to hire an attorney and walk through all those or learn from our experience that we've already done. There are the loopholes that people found along the way got closed by the regs that were passed out along the way. So there's not loopholes out there. The other thing too is you really are out of time to learn all the nuances, and there's a lot of nuances in the law. Little things like I was talking a little bit earlier about the non-calendar year plans, that having all these different tests that you have to comply with. And if your non-calendar year plan starts in June and you don't check to see if you pass all the tests until May, you're now assessed penalties from January through June, when you finally get in compliance, if you can even get into compliance, of $2,000 per employee. And there's also a larger penalty of $100 per employee per day. And we figured out what the cost of that, if you were to incur that $100 per employee penalty for an entire year, because chances are you're not going to find out about any penalty that you're incurring until it's way too late to fix it, because you've already been incurring it for a year. That would cost you, if you had 200 employees, $38,000 or $36,000 per employee. And then if you add the $2,000 penalty on top of it, that's where we get the $38,000 penalty. That, if you had 200 employees, is something like $7 million. So we're not talking about numbers that are anything to joke about, but there's little nuances that you may be not even realizing that you're in violation of the law, but you don't have time to learn it all because you waited too long. So, yeah, do you have something to add on that one, Sean?
Well, I just kind of had a piece of color commentary as I was reading the regulation, and you probably read it too. I bet we were probably like one of like the 5 people in America that actually read these regulations. But I kept noticing this word called subterfuge. I don't know if you're aware of that word, and so it was literally in there a bunch of times, and so I went to the dictionary and looked it up, and it says subterfuge is essentially a deception or a strategy to conceal, escape, or evade. And what they were using in the context of that regulation was basically, don't be trying to find these loopholes because we will close them. And the word subterfuge was in there like 38 times. I remember counting. So, just to your point about, they don't really care if you want to play the ignorant card. It is what it is. I mean, the executive branch doesn't really mess around. They're not political at all. They just essentially enforce the rules, and there really isn't a gray area.
Yep. And there are a lot of guaranteed compliance strategies out there. The biggest one that we're hearing about that's gotten a lot of media attention in the last couple of weeks is this, and the last couple of months actually, it's becoming quite well accepted, is this idea of offering a skinny plan. The skinny plan is basically the preventative and wellness benefits, and that satisfies the A penalty. And we went into, in a previous webinar that I did, I went into a lot of detail about these different strategies, the skinny plan, the bronze plan, things like that. And if you want to get that detail, I would go listen to that webinar, because we don't have time to go into all of the nuts and bolts of it right now. But the idea is offering a skinny plan that satisfies the A penalty across the board. And a lot of employers are even offering that to their variable hour. And here's why. At some level, the employer or the HR believes that they have a handle on the variable hour employees. And at the store level, depending on what industry you're in, Manager Joe just decides that he needs more hours, he needs this person to work this shift because he's got to run his store. Or let's say that Manager Joe is friends with Susie and wants to give her more hours to make sure that she has health insurance. There's things like that I hear about on a daily basis, where the employer believed that they had control of their labor, and it wasn't until it was too late that they found out, oh, well, Susie was a full-time employee that whole year, but we didn't authorize her to work that. And I realize there's bigger problems than that, and everyone likes to think that that's not happening in their organization, but I'm telling you from my experience, I'm seeing it all the time. So having offering a skinny plan even to your variable hour employees just across the board gets rid of that A penalty. And that A penalty is the most brutal, in my opinion, and the easiest to avoid. And I'm seeing a lot where, and I think, Sean, you would probably agree with me, there's not a single client that either of us have helped that was not going to be in violation of something before we helped them. So to think that, it's not that our employers are dumb or anything like that. It's that this law is that complicated, and there's that many little nuances to figure out.
Right.
Are you
it's
that?
just like similar to you hire an accountant to go through your taxes. We're talking about when you look at the scope of this law, it's almost comparable to the U.S. tax code in complexity. Nuances.
Exactly.
Especially with these regulations. And so it's nobody's fault if they can't get it. Heck, I have to talk to people like Kay and others across the country, and I, been working on it for 6 years because it's just something that keeps moving forward and changing over time.
Yes.
It's impossible to keep up on everything as a business owner.
So the second part of that strategy, first is offering the skinny plan that satisfies the A penalty. The second part of that is offering a bronze plan that satisfies the B penalty. And in order to satisfy the B penalty, the bronze plan has to be affordable and has to offer minimum value. And we're going to talk a little bit more, and we've talked a lot in previous webinars, and it's a little bit beyond the scope of this, this presentation today. But to be affordable, that means that the employer can charge no more than 9.5% of the employee's household income toward that employee's contribution. And then the other part of it is it has to offer minimum value, which means it has to satisfy a 60% actuarial value when you're considering the amount of the contribution that goes to pay for benefits as opposed to administrative fees. So if you offer both a skinny plan and a bronze plan, you can guarantee ACA compliance as long as you also are counting your employees correctly. And even if you do not know if you're counting your employees correctly, then the strategy is extended to just offer the skinny plan to all of your variable hour employees. So again, how does the strategy guarantee compliance? One is very simple, satisfy penalty A. 2, satisfy penalty B. 3, avoid the $100 per employee per day penalty. Now, we're not making light of this. It really is, you really can break the law down into those pieces. And when you are looking at your overall goal to mitigate your risk, then it makes all of your discussions that you have about this much simpler. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. So I've sat in a lot of meetings over the last year with a broker and the broker's clients, and they're talking about the different strategies that they're going to use. And I've often heard the employers and brokers talking about, well, we want to make sure that we offer great insurance benefits to our employees. And with that as their goal, they start looking at these huge costs that often they can't handle, and then they start getting creative and thinking things like, well, I'll just offer the program that satisfies the A penalty, and I'll take the risk that no one's going to trigger the B penalty, things like that. Or I'm going to do something in a way that would trigger the $100 per employee per day penalty because maybe no one will find out about it. And there's a whole list of things that would trigger that $100 per employee per day penalty. So when this is your goal, it changes all of the other discussion. All of a sudden, it's less. Now, I'm not saying that it's not important to have great benefits for your employees. It's great. In a perfect world, I wish we all had great benefits. But from the employer's standpoint, sometimes they can't afford for that to be their number one strategy. For example, I've got clients who were insuring 50 people last year, and next year has to insure 2,000. Their strategy needs to be about compliance and how they can do it without losing their business. It would be great if they could also offer great benefits that allow everyone hospitalization coverage and all this great coverage. But if they can't do that, they need to be focused on how do they avoid the penalties. Thoughts on that, Sean?
Yeah, I totally agree. And, one of the things that I'd like to add is I'm in an executive club, and it's kind of a non-compete thing where we meet every Tuesday morning for breakfast and have breakout speakers and talk about kind of what's going on in our businesses. And, this is always a topic of everybody's concern in that group. But one time we had an opportunity to have a speaker come in and talk, and he was a former IRS agent. And now he's working for the accounting firm that's in this club of mine. And, he kind of really talked about the process of how an audit would work. And, one thing that, need to be paying attention to this and doing these things now is because if you're audited for a certain thing on the tax side, this is going to certainly come into play. And it's going to be more along that lines, as in you get audited for some sort of tax purposes, and while they're in there, they're going to examine for ACA compliance. And that's where people really get hammered and get caught behind the 8 ball. That's kind of how I see it playing out.
Yep, and that's another reason why your strategy that guarantees compliance being your first priority is really critical, because if you have done something that guarantees compliance, your audit is going to be very quick. If you did some Yeah, if you did some game and you offered insurance after the 15th and you had a bunch of employees that went to the exchange and now you've got to prove that they really didn't qualify, now you've got to let someone into your office, into your books, and you've got to, deal with them getting into other areas of your business. So that's another one of the benefits of guaranteeing compliance. So we also are seeing a lot why most companies will not be in compliance even if they think they are. We touched a little bit on all of these points, and we're not exaggerating when we say most companies, because we know that a lot of companies are trying to do their compliance themselves, and even though they're trying as hard as they can, they're just missing things. So, for example, the counting employees incorrectly, sometimes it's just a complete mistake, and sometimes it's, like I said, the owners not knowing what the staff are doing. There's also a lot of nuances. We keep talking about some of them. Here's a couple more. The way that you offer the insurance is critical. For example, if you're offering insurance but you don't get it in writing and you don't have your employees sign that they were offered the insurance, it's your word against theirs on some level if you get audited 2 years later. And one of the other things that I point out is that these audits aren't going to happen real time. Like, it's not going to be that you offer the insurance, your employee gets a subsidy, and then the audit happens. The IRS themselves, in one of the presentations that I heard, said that they expect that they'll probably get around to audits about 18 months after the fact. So if they're saying 18 months, it's probably more like 2 years. And they're going to wait until all of the information comes in from the exchanges and all the reporting is done, everyone's filed their tax return, and then they're going to do the audit. So things like that, and if you don't have a document stating a document that's easy to locate and easy to present to the IRS agent showing that, in fact, you offered the insurance, it's going to be hard to prove it. The other nuances in the law are the 90-day rules. I don't know what you're seeing, Sean, but I think a lot of people are going to get those wrong and are going to get in trouble on that. I talk to employees all the time that just think, and also with the look-back method, well, I don't have to offer anyone insurance for 90 days, and now we've got this extra 30-day enrollment period, and they make things up sometimes. And I think the 90-day rules are a lot more complex than people think they are.
Yeah, what do you think they should be really as they approach that issue? I think this is certainly an area of confusion, especially because it kind of changes things a little bit. What are you seeing, and as you deal with this issue?
Well, it all relates back to how well you're documenting the entire look-back method, your measurement method, how you're documenting the 90-day rules. Do you have a trigger in your accounting or payroll system that shows, hey, this person has been working full-time for the last 90 days, I better offer them insurance next month? Because some people are assuming that, okay, this is a variable hour employee, I don't need to worry about them because during this whole look-back period, they're variable hour, and I can do whatever I want because I've titled them variable hour. Well, the regs have stated that if someone has a change in status where they are reasonably expected to work full-time, then they're supposed to be offered insurance within 90 days plus 30 of that change in status. So if you don't have some kind of mechanism to trigger, okay, I better start offering insurance, you could miss that, and then that one person becomes that trigger that either they can go to the exchange and trigger the $2,000 penalty or the $3,000 penalty. Now, there's nuances to that, obviously, because there's the margin of error rules. But if you don't understand these nuances, or at least have someone else there that can catch it for you, like what I do for my clients, and Sean, what you're doing for your clients, that's where I see people running into issues with the 90 days. But the safest thing is to have really clear delineation between who's full-time and who's part-time. Follow those 90-day rules very clearly, that if someone is supposed to be offered insurance, make sure that you offer them insurance within on the fourth month, because the most recent regs gave an extra 30 days. So that's a really critical one. And the other thing too is, as much as there's all these regs and there's all these laws, it's kind of being made up as they go. So when we were talking about these loopholes and things that people are finding, every time someone finds a loophole, the feds just hand out another set of regs that close it. And so if you're not on top of it like we are and we're immersed in it, there's going to be things that you miss. There's going to be changes that come out that you're going to miss. So that's why we think that most companies are going to be surprised next year. Thoughts on that, Don?
Well, it's just really important to just take a look at your whole process for onboarding employees moving forward. Because if you're not, looking at all of these things and measuring your people back, and the easiest thing that I say is to just kind of give you a ballpark is look back 6 months at every employee and anybody who works more than 780 hours over that 6-month period. Chances are they're going to be a full-timer and need to be offered.
Yeah, and there's a lot of strategy that you can do around this, the look back method. So I strongly recommend that you look at that with someone and look at all the different ways that you can run those numbers, because that's critical both for your strategy, your overall strategy, your planning for your labor, but also your planning for how you offer insurance, when you offer insurance, things like that.
Yeah, and I think, if there are opportunities for cost savings, like really taking a look and finding out the best approach for your organization, that's an area that there are opportunities, I think.
Definitely. So now we're on to tip number 3, document, document, document. So why are we talking about documenting so much? Well, we've already touched on the audit. At the end of the day, the way that the IRS is going to figure out if you paid the right amount of penalties, especially if your employees have reported conflicting information to the exchanges that you're not offering insurance, is going to be auditing your documentation. And like we said earlier, those audits are not going to take place until long after the fact. So you're going to have to be able to go back and find this documentation. It's going to have to be relevant to what they're looking at. And not only that, there's a lot of ERISA attorneys that are already getting ready to file lawsuits on employers who look like they cut hours for, to avoid paying benefits. One of the things I always tell my clients too, or when I speak, is even when you think you're not documenting, you're documenting. For example, I had a friend of mine who showed me a text that his daughter got from her manager, and that text said, "Hey, we've got to cut your hours because of Obamacare." And this manager was probably a 23-year-old kid, and that's now a document that will be evidence in court someday because it was a large brand name, large franchise name. Things like that you have to be very careful about what your managers are saying, what kind of things are being put in writing. I talked already about IRS timing, that they're not going to get around to doing this for so long that if you've got your document retention system is a room full of bankers boxes, your audit's going to suck. Any of us who have either been through an audit or have clients who've been through an audit know that when you've shown that you've made a good faith effort to comply, because you've got evidence of your strategy, evidence of every meeting that you held with your employees, evidence of every communication that was handed out. You got them to sign things saying, yes, I got this, yes, I understand it. All of those things are going to it's going to give you the benefit of the doubt, both in a lawsuit and in an audit. And then the other thing, too, is that now all these records are tax records where they need to be held for 7 years. And that wasn't something that really anyone was talking about before. But now, when an employee says that they were not offered insurance and they get a subsidy, and the way that is handled on their personal tax return, and if they actually made more money than they said they did, and your records are also part of their tax documentation now. Anything that you would add to this?
I'd just
Sean?
like to, add to the point on evidence of good faith efforts. kind of going back to the example I was talking about, the IRS agent coming to talk to our group, and, that is something that he brought up, is that, if you put in a good faith effort to try and comply, they're going to be a lot easier on you. And if, you're looking and trying to do your best, I think they're going to be much more merciful should the unforeseen circumstances come to fruition.
Not only that, the $100 per employee per day penalty, it can be capped, and it is a valid defense if you can say that you were making a good faith effort to comply, but you have to have evidence that it was a good faith effort, because if you don't have any documentation at all, you may say that you made a good faith effort, but according to the IRS agent, it may just look like you thumbed your nose at the whole darn thing. So you want evidence that it was a good faith effort. Now, we talk a lot about what you need to document. This is not an exhaustive list. There are many more that Sean can come up with, many more that I can come up with of things that you need to document. The very basic thing that I'm the most concerned about, because people just aren't talking about it, is your plan documents. Plan documents are something that were always required, and it was something that not many people did. It's becoming a bigger deal now because the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, IRS, they all are auditing actively for all of there's an interplay between the ACA and all of these different areas of law and different requirements. And they're actively auditing. I know people, especially in Ohio for some reason, they started there or something, I don't know, but I'm hearing a lot of people that are being audited for plan documents. The penalties for not having them are huge, but more importantly, the benefit that I've seen every single employer get from doing this document is understanding how they're offering their benefits and how they can save money. For example, the way that they categorize their employees. A lot of people don't even understand things that they're doing within their workforce, within their labor, that not only is costing them more money than necessary, but also is getting them in trouble. So one of the side effects that I'm seeing is that just in the process of putting this thing together, we're really helping employers to save money, create new profit centers, and get a handle on their business in a way that they didn't before. So that was kind of long-winded, but I just can't stress enough that no one's talking about this one, and I think it's one of the most important.
Yeah, just to echo your sentiments, I'm hearing the same thing, and it's just kind of disturbing to hear some of the facts that the Department of Labor really is trying to crack down on these issues, and it's something that's a pretty simple fix, but it could have really high consequences if it's avoided.
Yep. So they're just going down the list. Payroll records, obviously, you've got to be able to prove, that someone's saying that they were full-time. If you're saying that they weren't, you really need to have your payroll records. You need to have evidence of how you're calculating your look-back stability or your monthly measurement calculations. This is how you prove if someone was supposed to be offered insurance or not. And if you don't have a really clear way to show that you did that calculation, that's a problem. Proof of exchange notices, you're supposed to notify all of your new employees that of the exchange within 15 days of them beginning work. Your employee handbooks are really critical. If you've got, in the past you might have had language about full-time or part-time that now you now could get you in trouble. And also with the new OSHA whistleblower laws, you want to make sure that your employee handbooks are really up to date and really clear about what someone can be disciplined for. And if you've got a part-time hiring strategy, you need to make sure that that employee handbook is documenting that in a way that establishes that it's for a business purpose, not to avoid paying benefits. Even if you were part-time before, all of a sudden you've got to watch out for things like this, because there's a lot of like I said, these litigators who are out there getting ready to file these lawsuits. So you have to be careful of that. And I think that proof that you hired an attorney or a consultant or your CPA or some expert is further evidence that you made a good faith effort. Because when you can show look, here's my attorney signed off on this, or my attorney edited this letter, or my attorney gave me this opinion. Then when you are in your IRS audit and you say, well, I had an attorney that told me that this was okay. Even if your attorney was mistaken later, that's more evidence that you made a good faith effort. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
John?
I would totally agree. I mean, just if you would think how that scenario might play out, I think, having a party line of like, look, we retained an expert, we worked with our CPA, our broker, and our attorney to come up with the best solution, and based upon, our collective, analysis of the situation here is what we came with. And I'm sorry, Mr. IRS agent, if it's wrong, but we did the best that we could. I mean, that's a much better position to be in than saying, I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Not a good defense. So here's some more items that need to be documented. I've harped on this a lot because it's really important, but I'm going to say it again. Proof that your employee accepted or declined coverage. Get their signature if you can. All of my clients are doing written strategic plans, even if it's just an outline of the meetings that we're having, an outline of why they counted the employees the way that they did. What I keep telling them all is, I don't even care if it's complete sentences. Write it in bullet points. Just get it down on paper so that in a year, as when someone says, why the heck did you do that, you can refer to the strategic plan and say, this is why we did it. This is why we thought it was okay. And this is, the advice I got that told me it was okay. Proof of correspondence with employees, employers. There's a lot of brokers who I talk to and who are probably listening to this. You also need proof of all of your correspondence. If you've got employees that you're having meetings with, make sure that you keep copies of all of that. Proof of your HR practices, hiring policies, proper classification of employees. For example, we talk a lot about the 9.5% and how the employer can charge the 9.5% for the affordability. Having the proper classification of employees is really critical, because you can have a lot of different classifications and charge 9.5% of the lowest wage worker within each classification. Otherwise, if you don't have that properly documented and you just willy-nilly are charging different amounts to different people, you are absolutely going to be in trouble with discrimination rules. That is a no-no, and I'm not even talking about ACA. That's just a blatant ERISA. You can't do that. The reason we talk about clear documentation of all disciplinary action is because of this OSHA whistleblower statute or regs that came out that says that if an employee believes that they were retaliated against because they got a subsidy on the exchange, they can enact their whistleblower status with OSHA. And so it's really, and it's a very weak standard of proof. There's not a big burden of proof that someone has to satisfy in order to bring this claim. So you really need to make sure that if someone has been disciplined, there's clear documentation about what they did, so that if they do claim that whistleblower status, that you have evidence of why that isn't correct. And then also, I already talked about the seven-year documentation retention policy. Anything that I missed there, Sean, or you want to?
I'm really pleased that you brought up that number 5 on there of the clear documentation of those disciplinary actions against employees, because that's just kind of an area, just kind of looking at it, from a top level perspective of, I just kind of foresee that being an area of concern for a lot of people down the road. I don't know why. I just kind of got a bad feeling about that being a headache for a lot of employers.
Well, you know why else it's going to be a problem is because anytime there's a lot of discord in the employment situation, and we're seeing it both with minimum wage laws, with things in California, with different labor issues, you always see workers' comp claims go up at the same rate. And if we're going to see that workers' comp claims going up and OSHA claims happening, then you have to have proper, documentation of everything happening, because it's kind of a slippery slope. And I've been sitting on the board of trustees for the largest workers' comp self-insured group for restaurants in the state of California for the last couple of years, and we definitely see trends. You see, one employer fire their workforce, and the next day the entire workforce goes and files workers' comp claims because they all had back problems that same day. So I'm not making it up. This stuff happens. So making sure that you're on top of this is really critical.
Totally.
And so now November 5th is your new January 1st. We've talked a little bit about the November 15th, and the exchanges open on November 15th. Sean, I know that you follow a lot what's going on in Washington. Tell us a little bit about how employees are being recruited to get on these exchanges.
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, there's about $1 billion built into the ACA to promote this thing. Anytime you look at a new public policy effort, they put a lot of money into essentially, getting the word out and recruiting it. And I'm sure, I had a radio show last in open enrollment, and we poked fun at some of the efforts that they used, like Funny or Die and other things to get people on. But, the facts are the facts, and, they basically need a certain amount of lives on the system on the healthcare.gov for it to work. And, they're pretty far along where they were expecting to be. They've kind of hit their targets, but there's these 3 protections for insurance companies in the law that basically protect them from financial hardship should mostly sick individuals go on to their plans. And I think you could safely assume that was going to happen. And so they need to get as many healthy and young people into this, because once those protections go away, if we don't have the enough amount of lives of young and healthy people paying premiums to offset the influx of not healthy and sick folks, they're going to be into a serious problem. So absolutely, this is a huge effort for the executive branch to try and get people enrolled in these exchanges, and you really need to be conscientious about that, because those are the same folks that are your employees, particularly folks in like the service industry and other areas. I think are ones that really should be of concern, because their employees are going to get a really good deal in many states.
Yep, very good point. And again, we've talked about it a little bit, but you don't want conflicting information with the IRS. You don't want your employees out there saying accurately that you didn't offer insurance because you hadn't offered it yet. So it's much better if you can get your offer of insurance out before November 15th. And the biggest thing to me is that if you plan by November 15th and you mess up or you miscalculated something, you still have time to adjust by January 1st. So I really am encouraging everyone to think of November 15th as January 1st. And then we talked a little bit about why January 1st is too late. You have to give a reasonable time to enroll. Your compliance has to start on January 1st. In order to take advantage of the 90-day administration rules, you would have to already be prepared to plan. So you don't get after January 1st to do that 90-day administration. And I think a lot of people are already going to miss that for 2014. But at least you can be prepared to take full advantage of that next year for 2015. And I really want to emphasize, if you are on a non-calendar year plan, your penalties will begin accruing as of January 1st, even if you are mistaken or you don't satisfy one of the penalties. So my first advice would be just get on a January 1st plan, because there's too much to lose if you don't do it correctly. But if you don't do that, at least make sure that you are fully aware of your compliance. And Sean, let's talk about this quite quickly, because I see we're coming up to the hour mark. And if we have some time, we'll go through some questions. But I know you've talked a lot about why it's important to get help when you're doing this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, it's just, like I said, a lot of people are just, just so freaked out because it's just such a massive thing, and everybody's starting to kind of hear conflicting information and, differing views. And so, it's not a problem for you, or, you don't need to worry about hurting your ego, asking somebody for help on this issue, because it's no different than why you would hire somebody to help you with your financial planning or your taxes or other legal issues. But time's running out, and, you have to, kind of understand how this indirectly taxes your HR department and key people, that if you continue to avoid this issue and are kind of stuck in a position where you're in a reactionary position, how that is also going to affect your business. So it's just a lot easier to really ask for help. I know I do, and I'm supposedly an expert.
Yeah, Sean and I get on the phone a lot and say, what do you think of this? Have you heard about this? So
yeah.
Even among those of us who are immersed in it, we have to ask for help. So this is something that you don't have time anymore to learn the nuances. Now, my book does help with understanding the basics, and I strongly recommend you pick up that. And from what I hear from people, it's an easy read. That's why I published it. I actually first published it just for my clients because I needed something to outline for them the basics of what they need to do. And that's something that people really need to. Even though we're at the end of the year, you still need to understand the basics. So
I'd happily endorse that book. She's pretty funny, folks.
And I didn't even pay him to say that.
No.
So real quick, I know we're up to the hour, so if you need to go, please feel free to sign off and join us for our next webinar. Join both either my mailing list or Sean's mailing list. You can find it at our website, and we'll make sure to notify you of our next webinar. But if you want to stay on for this, I'm going to read through a couple quick questions. Jessica from California asked how an employer is supposed to figure out an employee's household income for the affordability test. This is a pretty simple one. The feds realized that no one was going to be able to understand someone's household income, so instead they created 3 safe harbors to determine the affordability. And those 3 safe harbors are rate of pay, W-2, and federal poverty level. And we don't have time for me to go into the details of those, but those are 3 different ways that you can calculate the employee's income. And the safe harbor says that the employee's contribution can be no more than 9.5% of that employee's income, not household income, their income. So that's the affordability safe harbor. The next question is Bill from North Carolina asks, I heard that for 2014 we only need to comply for 70% of our staff. Is that true, and will that change? Sean, I'll let you take that one.
Well, yeah, that's based upon the transitional relief, I would presume. That's what he's getting at. And they did make some transitional relief for employers. It was originally, 95% what
right.
they had to offer for under the law, and they are giving some wiggle room for 70%. But I think at the end of the day, you really need to be understanding that the fact that this is just kind of a Band-Aid to what's really coming down the road in 2016, and understand that the 70% is good for now, but moving forward, it will be back to the other thing.
Yep. And then Pam from Alabama asked, can we charge 9.5% of each employee's income in order to satisfy the 9.5% affordability test? Okay, good. So we did talk about this earlier. No, that's a big problem, big no-no, and I see a lot of employers thinking that they're going to be able to get away with that. You cannot charge 9.5% of each employee's income, because if you think about it, you would be charging different amounts for the exact same benefits. And what the corrective action would be to charge 9.5% of your lowest wage worker. And if you've got a huge range of salaries in your workplace, anywhere from minimum wage up to executive, that 9.5% for that executive is almost nothing. So you're going to get a massive number of people taking your insurance, and that's going to be very expensive. The way to do this is to work with an attorney and do a plan document and create categories of employees, and you can charge 9.5% of the lowest wage worker in each category. You need to be, it's much more complicated than that. I just simplified it for you a little bit, but at least that's an overview of the strategy that you can implement there. But if you don't document that whole thing correctly, that's a huge ERISA issues, huge lawsuits, huge fines. It's not something to mess around with, but it's a great planning tool. So with that, I think that I know we're out of time. Sean, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you, FreedomCare, for sponsoring this, and please join us for our next webinar as we continue this countdown to ACA Compliance.